Oh boy, it is finally here, and I am so excited. Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit is finally making its way to the trash heap, and it couldn't come soon enough. From the beginning, this coaster always struck me as a ripoff of Rock'n Rollercoaster from Disney's Hollywood Studios, which it was, and paired with its rough layout and awful train design, is I think easily the worst roller coaster in the state of Florida. Now, I've certainly experienced worse, much worse, and in comparison to what you might potentially find at a local regional amusement park, this is probably better. But when you're a high-demand tourist destination like Universal Studios, Rip Ride Rockit just isn't gonna cut it. Universal first embraced large thrill coasters in 1999 with the opening of Islands of Adventure, premiering with the Incredible Hulk and Dueling Dragons. What made them notable other than their theming, and in the case of Dueling Dragons, its dueling aspect, was that the coasters were designed with aesthetic placement and visual kineticism in mind. The way that the Hulk launches you over the pathway and out into the lagoon still resonates really well, and Universal has really embraced this with their newer additions too, ensuring that each new coaster is a visual spectacle that plays with the landscape. For all the flaws of Rockit, at the very least, I think it has become iconic for the skyline of Universal Studios Florida, and plays well visually with City Walk. Its striking red color certainly draws your attention, but is never garish, and the movement of the trains adds a lot to the park, especially during night with its strobing light effect. That's where the positives stop though, as the coaster premiered during what I would call the cursed era of Universal Studios Florida. Starting in 2008 with the Simpsons ride, and ending in 2018 with Fast and Furious Supercharged, this period for the park is what transformed it into the mess that it is today, replacing outdated but classic rides in favor of screen-based attractions that, for the most part, are generally considered to be either underwhelming or just straight up bad. Throw in this mess of a roller coaster, and you've solidified this era as being a massive misstep in the history of the park. Now granted, while 2019 seemed to be the turning point for Universal creatively with the premiere of Hagrid's at Islands, which was followed by other excellent additions in Hollywood and with the international parks, it appears that Universal Studios Florida is still suffering under the curse of bad attractions. Despite its creative ride system, Villain Con Minion Blast is one of the worst rides that I've ever experienced, and DreamWorks Land is clearly cheap and rushed, likely constrained by the budget for the creative triumph that is Epic Universe. However, now that that park is open, I'm hoping that the studios finally gets the investment that it needs, and with the surprising, unexpected closure of Rockit, I'm hoping that's the start of a new era that will bring the park back to greatness. So today, let's dive into a retrospective on Florida's absolutely worst roller coaster and see how it had so much potential that was just completely thrown away. Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit opened on August 19, 2009. It was manufactured by Maurer Sohn. There's a weird misconception online that Maurer went out of business, a point that I admittedly believe I may have actually parroted somewhere in an old video from 4 or 5 years ago. But while the company did change its name to Maurer AG in 2014, it's still very much in business and producing new coasters. I mention this point because people have speculated that Rip Ride Rockit is closing because Universal is no longer able to acquire parts from Maurer, but that's clearly not the case. What makes Rockit interesting is that the coaster type is quite rare, and is known as the X-Car model. These were developed by Maurer with the intention of redefining the industry, in that while coasters with inversions used over-the-shoulder restraints to safely secure riders, the X-Car would do it with a lap bar instead. The first version of this model premiered in 2003 with Skywheel at Skyline Park, and what made it notable was its vertical lift hill that transitions slowly into an upside-down lift that brings riders to the top. Maurer built a few other versions of this model, with G-Force at Drayton Manor being a notable 2005 premiere with its bizarre lift hill through a loop. While the restraint system for the X-Car was definitely innovative, as the restraint bar secured riders by holding them in by their stomach, it's just downright uncomfortable, which combines with the awkward coaster elements and layouts, led to a model that never really caught on despite its novelty. However, Universal took a chance with Maurer and contracted them for Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit, which took the X car and added a touchpad to the restraint where riders could choose a song that synced with the ride layout. The theme of Rockit is straightforward, as it celebrates music, and riders are essentially put into the role of filming a music video. Choosing from 5 different genres on the touchpad, each menu had a list of 5 songs that were licensed and could be attached to a music video souvenir that was filmed by cameras on the ride. There is also a secret menu that can be accessed, where after inputting a code, riders can experience what I believe is at least another 60 song selections, although these are not licensed and can't be used for the video. While the ability to choose your song is unique, even if you stick to the original 30 that it presents you with, Rockit always gave me the impression of being a lesser, derivative version of Rockit Rollercoaster at Hollywood Studios. I think that might be lost on people today, but for 2009, the existence of a roller coaster with synchronized audio was still very new and novel. Space Mountain from the Earth to the Moon at Disneyland Paris was the first to premiere with a soundtrack in 1995, which was then followed a few months later with new trains and a soundtrack for the version of Space Mountain in the original California Disneyland. In 1999, Rock and Roller Coaster opened at Disney MGM Studios with its trains synced to Aerosmith, and for most people, this was their first and only experience with music on a roller coaster until the last 15 years or so. That's why, at the time of the premiere of Rockit, it very much felt like Universal's misguided derivative take on Rock and Roller Coaster, which, along with its bare-bones theming and outdoor layout, felt lazy and failed to understand what made Disney's coaster so appealing with its indoor location and theming. The option to have a large song selection was certainly unique, and I don't believe that feature has been replicated anywhere else. But along with feeling gimmicky and having almost no theming, it had one other big problem: the layout. After moving through the queue and boarding the train on a belt in the station, riders ascend the 167-foot tall vertical lift hill, which, if you watch the channel on the regular, you'll know that I absolutely hate. Not only do I find vertical lifts to be extremely uncomfortable, but the first time I experienced this ride, I remember the sun being directly overhead, which was absolutely blinding. After cresting the top, the train drops into a non-inverting loop over the Universal Music Plaza stage, which is known as the double take, establishing that the ride's elements and layout is themed to music. I think that despite the execution, which is made unpleasant by the style of trains that lead to the rough experience, the layout is at least notably clever, so I'll give it credit there. Pulling up out of the double take, the train crosses a brake run and dives into the next segment. Crashing through a facade and looping up to the left, the train moves through the treble clef, an element designed to resemble the actual musical symbol used in sheet music. It doesn't really follow the shape well at all, but I at least appreciate the creativity. Moving through another brake run directly under the first, riders travel into a section of banked turns that goes behind the stage and over the queue, which is named as the jump cut. Ascending into the third brake run, the track moves out into City Walk, where it dives into a winding trench. Pulling up into an inclined loop, the train exits and enters the fourth brake run, which then transitions into a curvy hill that bucks riders out of the seat before encountering the final brakes right at the station. While my description of the layout is rather brief, the ride time clocks in at around 2 minutes, as you spend roughly 30 seconds on the vertical lift, and many of the elements are long and winding. While the layout of Rockit is clever and quite unique, the X-Cars are what hold it back from being great. Because the restraint holds you in by your stomach rather than your lap, the forces generated from the layout often throw riders from their seat, where they then slam down on their crotch. Or riders are sometimes thrown forward, pushing their stomach into the restraint, which can knock the wind out of you a bit. Unfortunately, while Maurer was trying to revolutionize the industry, their trains are just so uncomfortable that the model never really got more than a few coasters past Rockit, and for Universal, they were now stuck with a ride that never really lived up to its potential. Rockit is also infamous for technical issues, as I feel like there's always an annual news report about how people got stuck sitting on the lift hill for hours, and I've even seen a few photos and video of the trains valleying, which appears to happen every so often. In 2020, for Universal's Christmas celebration, which allowed people to view the Macy's Holiday Parade floats in one of the sound stages, I recall actually walking through a queue that went under the track. However, it was clear that a train had valleyed there with a tarp thrown over it, which I guess doesn't really hide the problem, but I did think was funny. From my observation, the ride seems to go down often, and I've noticed that while other Universal coasters will stay open in the rain if there's no lightning, Rockit always seems to close, indicating that even some rain and wind can cause issues. When it was announced that the coaster would be closing, I was actually quite surprised, because despite its notorious roughness, it wasn't really what I thought the park would prioritize replacing. Still, considering the frequent closures and the very visible technical issues, I think the demolition does make sense. Part of why I also thought that the closure of Rockit was strange was because, while people within the theme park and coaster community agree that the experience is quite rough, it's still quite popular with the general public. How often have I read about the experiences of people who thought the lift hill was terrifying, or that they were proud of themselves for going on the first upside-down roller coaster, despite it not actually having a single inversion. I've seen a lot of people asking for advice on Universal subreddits about how to conquer their fear of it, and a lot of others exclaiming how much fun it is and how they loved that they got to choose a song. Do I think it's awful? Yes, but the average person who visits the park isn't going to understand the nuance of what makes for a good coaster. And for most people, the adrenaline surge or the social aspect of riding is what makes it appealing. I would say that it's actually still quite popular and well liked, despite the reservations of critics. And so, I have to conclude that the technical issues are a big part of what is driving the replacement. I think it's fairly obvious that Rockit is going to be replaced by another coaster, as there's not much else you can do with this footprint of the park. And even from early construction, which has occurred before the coaster is closed, you can see that Universal is very ready to replace it quickly. I think that with Epic sucking up so much budget from other projects, which is evident through the cheap nature of VillainCon and DreamWorks Land, a new, quick coaster replacement is actually a budget-conscious decision. Not that coasters don't cost between $20 to $30 million to build today, but compared to complex dark rides, it's actually a relatively cheap return on investment, especially since coasters are almost always a big, marketable draw. Alicia Stella at Theme Park Stop has also reported the rumor that the replacement may be themed to Fast and Furious, which, considering that she also reported on documents that state that the manufacturer is Intamin, I think that very well could indicate that it's the same model of coaster that's being built in California as Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift. She also made the point that the new coaster corresponded with the closing of the Fast and Furious segment on the tram tour, and it may not be a stretch to assume that the same may occur in Florida. If this is true, while I think that the park is in desperate need of quality dark rides to replace a lot of its simulators, the new coaster could be the first step in allowing that to happen. At the very least, I anticipate a coaster layout that's far more interesting and comfortable than Rockit, and while I will miss what it does for the skyline of the park, I can't say that I have any other reservations about its closure. I'm excited for what this could mean for the future of Universal Studios Florida, where the curse might finally be broken, and I'm just so glad to see Rockit gone. It's a coaster with a notable music-themed layout that's held back by awful train design, and while the feature to pick your song for the ride was quite unique, it was always a gimmick that tried to copy the success of what Disney pioneered, throwing away the potential for this coaster to do something that could have been more unique. I think that literally any other theme that they could have come up with would have been more interesting. So, goodbye, Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit. Your closure couldn't have come soon enough. I actually anticipate that this video may be quite divisive, especially since general parkgoers do seem to like this coaster despite its many clear faults. But if you agree with me, or at the very least want to support the channel, I would appreciate it if you left a like. As always, if you like videos like these and want to stay up to date, I also recommend hitting the subscribe button with bell notification, so as to be alerted to new videos as they're released.